Some men find out their wife is cheating through a text message left open on the kitchen counter. Some find a receipt. Some get a call from someone who felt guilty keeping the secret too long. Me. I found out because of a parking stub. I know how that sounds. A parking stub, $5, a little paper card from a hotel garage downtown that most people throw away without even looking at it. But stay with me, because by the time this story is done, you are going to understand exactly how that card unraveled 17 years of marriage, exposed a conspiracy that quietly stole 3 years of my professional life, and ended with me standing in a ballroom full of the most powerful names in Texas sports media, holding a glass of ginger ale, watching the man who tried to erase me receive the most public humiliation of his career. We'll get there. Let's start at the beginning. My name is Jack Mercer. I am 47 years old. I have spent most of my adult life doing the one thing I was made to do, writing sports journalism. Not the recap, not the box score. The deeper story underneath the game. The politics inside a locker room. The financial engineering behind a franchise trade. The human being behind the statistic. The thing that makes you set the article down and stare at the wall for a minute because it rearranged something in you. That kind of writing. I lived at the time this story begins in a 2-story house on Clearfield Drive in the Westover Hills neighborhood on the west side of Houston. Good street, wide lots. The kind of neighborhood where people wave from their driveways and actually mean it. We'd been there 6 years. My wife was Diana, 42 years old, a broadcast journalist with an on-camera contract at KHOU, Channel 11, the CBS affiliate in Houston. Warm on camera in a way you can't teach. Naturally at ease in front of a lens in a way that made strangers trust her immediately. She had dark eyes and a smile that said, "I'm your friend," before she opened her mouth. We met at a media conference in San Antonio when I was 30 and she was 25. Married in 2007. Small ceremony. Hill country, the whole romantic picture. For a long time, it was good. I was a staff writer and eventually senior contributor at Lone Star Sports Weekly, a regional sports magazine where I'd spent 8 years building a byline that meant something. My editor was a man named Colin Vance, 53 years old. Corner office. Salt and pepper hair he kept slightly too long for his age. French cuff shirts on Thursdays because he said Thursdays felt like the right day for them. He drove a silver Audi A6. He mentioned his corner office approximately once every 4 conversations. I had trusted Colin Vance for 8 years. I had no idea that, for the last 3 of those years, he had been quietly, methodically, surgically dismantling my career from the inside. I didn't know any of that on the Saturday morning in February when I put my hand into my wife's coat pocket and pulled out a parking stub. Worth Field Grand Hotel, downtown Houston. The previous Thursday, entry 6:14 p.m., exit 11:47 p.m., 5.5 hours. Diana had told me that Thursday she was at dinner with her segment producer. I stood in the laundry room with her coat in one hand and that stub in the other. And I made a decision that I have never once regretted. I put it in my own pocket. I threw the coat in the wash. I walked back to the kitchen, poured myself a coffee, sat down at the table, and I started thinking like a journalist. Here is something they don't teach you in journalism school, but that 20 years of the work will teach you eventually. A single data point is not a story. A single data point is an invitation to look harder. I had one data point, a parking stub, from a hotel where my wife said she wasn't. That told me something was off. It did not tell me what. It did not tell me with whom. It did not tell me how long or how serious or what else I might find if I started looking in the right directions. And the worst thing a journalist can do with a lead, the absolute worst, is act on it before the picture is complete. So I waited. I was not idle during those 2 weeks. I started paying attention in the specific, calibrated way that I pay attention when I'm working a story I can't quite see the shape of yet. I noted when Diana came home and when she didn't. I noticed the way she angled her phone screen away from me when a text came in, a small adjustment, probably unconscious, that she had not always made. I noticed she had started wearing a different perfume, something lighter and more expensive. I noticed that on the evenings she said she was working late. She came home with a particular ease about her. The kind of ease that comes not from a long shift, but from an afternoon spent somewhere that felt good. I wrote none of this down. I kept it in my head, where it belonged, for now. And at the same time, because I am constitutionally unable to work only one angle at a time, I went back through my professional history. I pulled every story pitch I had submitted to Colin Vance over the past 3 years. 31 pitches. I cross-referenced them against pieces that had run in competing outlets during the same period. 11 of my pitched angles had appeared elsewhere. Not similar angles, not adjacent ideas. My angles, sometimes nearly verbatim in terms of framing, headline approach, and structural argument, published under other bylines in other publications. Between 3 and 8 months after I had submitted them to Colin Vance and been told they weren't quite right for the direction we're going, 11 out of 31. I sat with that number. Then I pulled up the piece that had bothered me most, a January feature in Texas Monthly titled "The Money Behind the Texans: How Houston's Ownership Structure is Quietly Reshaping the AFC South," written by a 29-year-old named Devon Walsh, 2 years out of UT Austin's journalism program. Good writer, talented, clean instincts. That piece had won a regional award from the Texas Press Association. I had pitched that exact story to Colin Vance in March of 2022. He had told me the angle was too inside baseball for our readership. I sat in my car in the parking lot of the HEB on Westheimer for a long time after I connected those two facts. Engine off, grocery bags in the back seat going warm, staring at nothing. This had a shape now. Not a complete shape, but a shape. I drove home, I made dinner, I sat at the table with Diana and said very little, and she did not seem to notice, which told me something I didn't particularly want to know. I filed it away and kept going. 3 weeks after the parking stub, on a Monday afternoon in mid-March, I came home early. I had a late editorial call with Colin scheduled for 4 o'clock, which I planned to take from my home office. I was upstairs packing a bag for a story I was covering in Austin the next morning, moving through the bedroom on autopilot, when I heard the front door open. Diana was not supposed to be home. She had a 3 o'clock live segment from the KHOU studios in the Galleria area. She had told me that morning she'd be back by 7. It was 2:15 on a Monday. I heard her voice, bright, relaxed, easy in a way she hadn't sounded around me in months, and then I heard a second voice. A man's voice. I set down the bag. Some instinct, immediate and physical, below the level of thought, said, "Get out of sight." Not out of fear. Out of the specific professional instinct that has kept me from blowing interviews and stakeouts for 2 decades. You don't show yourself until you know what you're walking into. I moved to the back stairs. Our house has a back staircase off the kitchen, original to the 1958 build, and I used it to get to the kitchen level and then straight out the back door into the yard without passing through the front of the house. The backyard in late Texas winter, 50 degrees, grey sky, no wind, dry grass, and the cedar smell that Houston gets in March when the cold front has pushed through and left the air clean. Our back porch runs the length of the house, and there are 2 tall windows that look into the kitchen and the open dining area beyond it. I pressed my back against the exterior wall, 3 feet from those windows, and I listened. The man's voice came through the old single-pane glass clearly enough. I placed it in less than 3 seconds. Colin Vance. Of course it was. Diana was moving around the kitchen, cabinets opening and closing. The refrigerator. She sounded relaxed and happy in the way she used to sound in the early years of our marriage. In a way I had not heard from her in longer than I wanted to count. "You're going to love this wine," she said. "I found it at that shop on Montrose." "I trust your taste," Colin said. There was a warmth in his voice that I had never heard from him in 8 years of professional relationship. Not warmth he performed, warmth that had settled in. The sound of pouring. A pause. And then Colin said, "Has he mentioned the Walsh piece to you?" Diana laughed. Not a nervous laugh, a dismissive one, the laugh of someone who has been asked this question before and finds it slightly tiresome. "Once," she said, "he sat with it for a night. You know, Jack, he processes, he files it away, he moves on. He's not the type to push." Good. A pause. Because the Houston piece came directly from his March 2022 submission. Devon cleaned it up, gave it his voice. But the core angle, the structure, the argument that's Jack's, "I know that." Was that a problem? It would be if he were the type to make it one, Diana said. But that's the whole point, isn't it? Colin's voice dropped then. Not in volume, in register, more deliberate, the voice he used in editorial meetings when he wanted to sound like he was being reasonable about something unreasonable. He's manageable, he said. He's always been manageable. Another year, maybe 18 months, and he'll be too far down the masthead to matter. Then we restructure the section, and the question resolves itself. I stopped breathing. Manageable. I have been a lot of things in my life. I have been broken, exhausted, and passed over, and frustrated, and lost, and wrong. I have been the guy in the room who wasn't supposed to be there. And I have been the guy in the room who didn't know he wasn't supposed to be there. Which is worse. But manageable, that word, coming through my kitchen window in my editor's voice while he drank wine with my wife in my house. That was new. My pulse was steady. That surprised me. I expected rage, the explosive kind that makes men do things they regret before the night is over. What I felt instead was quieter than that. It was clarity. Everything I had been half-seeing for 3 years, every killed pitch, every diminished placement. Every morning I looked at my byline and felt the slow erosion of something I'd spent 20 years building, all of it collapsed into a single point of understanding. He wasn't just sleeping with my wife. He was erasing me. And she had known. She had known the whole time. She had been the one who told him I was manageable. She had been the one who reassured him I wouldn't push. I pulled out my phone. I opened the voice memos app. I held it toward the window. They talked for 12 minutes and 43 seconds. I recorded all of it. Then I put my phone back in my pocket, walked quietly along the back of the house, let myself out through the side gate, got in my car, and drove around the block twice before I parked again on the street in front of my own house and sat there until my hands stopped feeling cold. Don't fall apart right now, Jack. You're going to fall apart later. First, you're going to work. They left together at around 4 o'clock. I heard the front door close and Diana's voice, bright and easy, calling out that she'd be back by 8, that she was heading into the station. She was not heading to the station. I waited 15 minutes after they left, then I went inside. I poured the rest of the wine down the sink, both glasses, rinsed them, dried them, put them back in the cabinet exactly where they had been. Then I sat down at the kitchen table, our kitchen table. The one we'd found at an antique market on Washington Avenue the year we moved into the house, and I listened to the recording, all 12 minutes of it. Then I listened again. Then I backed it up to 3 separate locations, because I am a journalist, and journalists know what to do with evidence. Diana came home at 8:22. She said the segment had run long. I told her that was fine. I had made pasta. I set a plate on the counter for her and told her I had an early start the next morning. She thanked me. We didn't eat together. I lay in bed that night and ran back through 3 years of conversations. Every time she'd asked how work was going with genuine-sounding sympathy. Every time she'd told me Colin was probably just managing editorial changes and I should be patient. Every time she'd said, in that warm and reasonable voice, that I was probably overreading things. She had known every single time. I did not sleep. By morning, I had made 2 decisions. The first, I was going to call Rachel Stone. Rachel Stone was 50 years old and ran the Texas bureau of the American Sports Review, the most widely read sports journalism platform in the country, digital and print combined. I had met her at the AP Sports Editors Conference in Dallas 5 years earlier. We had kept in loose contact since. She was precise, fair, and published the kind of work that lasted. The second decision, I was going to find out if this was bigger than just me. Because 11 stolen pitches across 3 years is a pattern, and a pattern means a practice, and a practice doesn't usually have only one victim. I made 2 phone calls before I drove to Austin. The first was to a woman named Priya Nair, 36 years old, formerly a staff writer at Lone Star Sports Weekly from 2019 to 2021. She had left the magazine abruptly. Colin had put it about that she'd taken a better opportunity in Dallas, which was technically true but incomplete in the specific way that true but incomplete things are always incomplete on purpose. Priya was now freelancing out of Dallas. Good work, respected. But she had never quite regained the platform she'd had before she left. I had always liked Priya when I called her. There was a pause when I said who it was. And then she said, "How did you know to call?" That sentence told me everything I needed to know. The second call was to a man named Gary Howland, 42 years old, former senior editor at Lone Star Sports Weekly. Pushed out in 2020, Colin had called it restructuring. Gary was now working in sports communications in Dallas, doing fine, but the editorial career he'd been building had stopped. He picked up on the first ring. When I said I wanted to talk about his time at the magazine, he said, "I've been waiting for someone to call about this for 2 years. 3 writers, 3 careers that had been slowed, diverted, or ended. 1 editor." I drove to Austin on a Tuesday morning in March. The sky was clear and sharp-edged the way Texas gets after a cold front pushes through and leaves everything clean. I took I-10 west and then cut south on 71, and I did not listen to music and I did not call anyone else. I thought about Diana, about Colin, about the word manageable and what it means to spend 17 years building a life with someone who thought of you in those terms. I want to be honest, I did not handle that drive with grace. I stopped at a gas station outside of Bastrop, sat on the hood of my car in the wind, and called my younger brother Danny in San Antonio. Danny is 44, works in commercial real estate, and is the kind of man who listens before he speaks. When I told him everything, the recording, the parking stub, all of it, he was quiet for a long moment. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I will be..." That's not what I asked. I know, I will be anyway. He told me to be careful, not careful with the story, careful with myself. He said the thing people don't tell you about betrayal is that the anger is the easy part. It's the grief underneath the anger that gets you when you're not paying attention. He was right, he usually is. I got back in the car and drove the rest of the way to Austin. Rachel Stone met me at the bar of Hotel Vanzetti on Lavaca Street in the Rainy Street district, a place she'd suggested, which was either her idea of neutral ground or she just liked the cocktail program, and I wasn't about to ask which. She was already there when I arrived, small woman, sharp eyes behind wire-frame glasses. The specific stillness of someone who has spent decades interviewing people who were trying not to be interviewed. A sparkling water in front of her. A legal pad she turned face down when she saw me, which is a journalist's habit I both recognized and respected. "Jack Mercer," she said, in the way people say names when they're greeting you and sizing you up simultaneously. "Sheila." I sat down, ordered a club soda. "Thanks for making time." "You said it was going to make noise." "It is." She folded her hands on the table. "Then I'm here." So I told her everything. The Devon Walsh piece and my March 2022 submission. The 11 parallel pitches across 3 years, the parking stub, the backyard, the recording. I showed her the voice memo on my phone and let her listen to the first 3 minutes through her earbuds. I watched her face while she listened. Rachel Stone had trained her face not to react. It reacted anyway. Just barely. The slight tension at the corner of her mouth. The way she went very still about 90 seconds in. When she pulled the earbuds out, She set them on the table carefully. "This is your editor."
Yes.
"And the woman is your wife." "Yes." "And he explicitly says he redirected your pitches to other writers. He says the Houston piece, which won a Texas Press Association award under Devon Walsh's byline, came directly from my March 2022 submission." She picked up her sparkling water and held it without drinking it. A thinking gesture. "How many pitches do you think were shared?" "I've documented 11 confirmed parallels over 3 years. There may be more I haven't traced." Another pause. "You know, this is more than a personal story." "I know." If one editor at a regional outlet was doing this systematically, the question becomes whether it's broader, whether there are other writers, other publications.
That's why I called Priya Nair and Gary Howland before I drove down here.
She set the glass down. "Tell me." I told her about Priya, about Gary, about the pattern of careers that had stalled or stopped in Colin Vance's editorial wake. When I finished, Rachel Stone looked at me for a long moment. "I'm going to need your attorney's contact information," she said, "and I'm going to need 3 weeks."
I told her she had both.
The drive back to Houston that evening felt different from the drive down. Not lighter, exactly, but different in the way you feel when you've converted something that was crushing you into something with weight and direction and momentum. I had walked into that bar in Austin with a parking stub, a recording, and a theory.
I was driving home with a story.
3 weeks. I want to tell you that I handled those 3 weeks with clean, uncomplicated dignity. The truth is messier than that. The performance of an undamaged marriage is exhausting in a way I was not prepared for. Not emotionally, I had compartmentalized the emotional reality with the specific ruthlessness of someone who learned early to keep his feelings somewhere they wouldn't get stepped on. But physically exhausting in the way that any sustained performance is exhausting, the constant low-level effort of being normal, of maintaining eye contact and passing the salt and asking about someone's day and listening to the answer with the face of a man who does not know what he knows. Diana was in good spirits those weeks. She had a segment she was developing, a feature on the Houston Dash women's soccer program, and she talked about it over dinner with genuine enthusiasm. She had good energy, the energy of someone whose life outside the house was going well. I listened, I asked questions, I did not throw anything. I went into the office, I sat in pitch meetings with Colin Vance and looked at him across the conference table and said things like, "I'm thinking the angle could go deeper on the salary cap structure." And he said things like, "Let me sit with that, Jack." And I nodded and wrote something in my notebook and thought about Rachel Stone's legal team in Austin doing their work.
Once, in the elevator on the way back up from lunch, Colin said, "You seem like you're in a good headspace lately."
"Things are clear," I said. "Good, clear is good." "You have no idea." I thought, "Clear is going to be the last thing you ever call me." Then Devon Walsh called. It was a Thursday morning in late March. Rachel's team had reached out to Devon at my agreement and her instruction to verify the sourcing of his Houston ownership piece. They had not revealed where the original pitch had come from. They had simply asked Devon how the assignment had come to him. When Devon called me, he sounded like a man who had just realized the floor beneath him had a different composition than he'd thought. "Jack," he said, "did you pitch a piece on Texans' ownership structure to Lone Star Sports Weekly in March of 2022?
I did.
A silence. Colin gave me that assignment in September of 2022. He said it was a magazine concept that had been floating around the editorial room. He said it was, and I remember this exactly, ripe for a young voice. He told me the previous writer who'd looked at it had dropped the thread.
Devon's voice had gone quiet. "Was that you? Were you the writer?" "Yeah," I said. "I was."
Another silence. Longer. "I won a Texas Press Association award for that piece."
"I know." "Jack, I don't even know what to say to you right now."
"You didn't know," I told him. "That is the complete truth, and I need you to hear it. You didn't know. The only question now is whether you want to help make it right." He said yes before I finished the sentence. 4 writers now. The story had grown again. Then Gary Howland sent me an email, just a link and 3 words.
Look at this.
The link went to a LinkedIn announcement posted that morning. Colin Vance had been named a finalist for the Texas Sports Writer of the Year Editorial Award, presented annually by the Texas Sports Writers Association for excellence in editorial leadership and development of talent.
I read that phrase 3 times.
Excellence in editorial leadership and development of talent. I sat very still for about 30 seconds. Then I opened my laptop and wrote an email to Rachel Stone with 1 line in the subject field. We have a deadline. The Texas Sports Writers Association Annual Awards Dinner was scheduled for a Friday evening in April at the Coronado Grand Hotel in downtown Houston. 15 floors of Texas hospitality right in the heart of the theater district. One of the most attended nights in the Texas sports media calendar. Editors, writers, broadcast journalists, publicists, franchise representatives. If you worked in Texas sports media, you were in that room. Rachel had 3 weeks and 4 days. Can you make it? I asked her. We were already ahead of schedule, she said. Your timeline just gave us a reason to finish. The piece would run on the morning of the awards dinner. Digital first. 7 a.m., print the following week, 4 bylines. Priya Nair, Gary Howland, Devon Walsh, and mine, Jack Mercer, listed first because Rachel insisted it meant something that I was the one who made the call. Are you ready for what comes after this? Rachel asked. It was a real question. She was not asking about the publication. She was asking about everything else. The marriage, the job, the version of my life I would walk back into once the story was out. I thought about that parking stub, about Colin's voice through a kitchen window, about 17 years of something I had believed was real.
I've been ready, I said. Since I was standing in my backyard in February.
I did not tell Diana. Not a word, not a hint, not a shift in tone, or a significant glance, or any of the things that give people away when they're carrying something large. She mentioned she was planning to attend the awards dinner with some KHOU colleagues. She covered sports-adjacent content and had acquaintances in that room. She said it would be good for us to be seen out together.
That sounds nice, I said.
The American Sports Review piece went live at 7:03 a.m. on Friday, April 19th, 2024. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my coffee when Rachel's text came through. It's live. The headline, The Editor's Cut. How one Texas publication's top editor redirected writers' original work for years, and why 4 journalists are finally speaking out. I read it through one more time, start to finish. Even though I had read every draft and revision for 3 weeks, it was clean, precise, fair in the way that the best journalism is fair, which does not mean soft, it means accurate. Then I set my phone face down on the table, finished my coffee, showered, and put on the grey suit I'd had dry cleaned the week before. Diana was still upstairs. She had no idea. That was fine. She was going to find out soon enough. The Coronado Grand Hotel is a beautiful building. If you've never been to downtown Houston on a Friday night in April, when the city has shaken off the winter and the air still has that brief, perfect coolness before summer arrives and claims everything, it's the kind of night that makes you remember why you live somewhere. The ballroom where the Texas Sports Writers Association held its annual dinner was on the 4th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows looking out at the Houston skyline, round tables with white linen. The particular buzz of a room full of people who spend their professional lives in press boxes and deadline rooms and are glad for one evening to be in a place that has a bread basket and a full bar. I arrived at 6:45. I want to be honest about what I was feeling, walking into that room. Not triumphant, not electric. What I felt was more like the feeling at the end of a very long project, a specific tiredness with satisfaction underneath it, the kind that says it's done and it was worth it. I had my phone in my jacket pocket. Rachel's piece had been shared 11,000 times as of 4 p.m. and was trending in Texas media circles. I had not checked it since then.
I didn't need to.
I saw Colin Vance at the bar before he saw me. He was holding a glass of white wine, talking to two men I recognized from the San Antonio Express News sports desk, laughing at something. He was wearing a dark navy blazer. His hair was freshly cut. He looked, in that moment, like exactly what he was supposed to look like: a respected editor at the peak of an estimable career, about to accept an award for developing the talent of others. He hadn't checked his phone in the last several minutes. I could tell, because when something is moving fast on the internet and your name is attached to it, there's a specific behavior that develops, a pocket-reaching reflex, a slight pull of distraction, like a sound at the edge of hearing.
He didn't have it yet. He was still in the room he thought he was in.
I got a drink, ginger ale. I wanted to be sharp. I circulated, I spoke to people I knew. I had the kind of normal, easy conversations I have had at events like this for 20 years. The Rockets' salary structure, the Astros' pitching rotation. Whether the Texans had what it took to make a real playoff run. Good conversations, conversations about things that matter in the specific way sports matters, which is completely and not at all simultaneously. Diana was across the room with her KHOU colleagues. We made eye contact once. She smiled. I smiled back. She hadn't checked her phone either. Dinner was served at 7:30. The program moved through its usual structure. Welcome remarks from the TXSA president. A video tribute to a retired columnist from the Austin American-Statesman. A series of category awards, each one announced with the particular blend of ceremony and efficiency that these events require.
I ate the salmon, I drank my ginger ale, I waited.
The Editorial Leadership Award, the one Colin Vance was nominated for, was scheduled third from last. At 9:18, my phone began to vibrate continuously in my jacket pocket. I did not take it out.
I already knew what it was. At 9:22. I watched Colin Vance reach into his pocket.
I watched his face. Journalists learn faces. It is one of the foundational skills of this work. The ability to read what's happening in a person before their performance catches up with their reality. I had watched athletes receive bad news. I had watched executives absorb the fact that I was about to publish something they had hoped I wouldn't. I had watched coaches, in the moment they understood the season was over. What happened on Colin Vance's face at 9:22 p.m. in the ballroom of the Coronado Grand Hotel was the most complete unraveling I have ever witnessed that quietly. It wasn't dramatic. He didn't stand up, he didn't make a sound, his face didn't crumple. It just went flat. The animation left him the way light leaves a room when someone throws a breaker. One moment he was a man performing confidence in a room full of his peers, and the next he was just a man sitting at a table with a phone in his hand, running out of road. He looked up once, scanning the room. Our eyes met. I held his gaze for exactly 3 seconds. Then I looked away. The TXSA president returned to the podium at 9:38 to announce the editorial leadership nominees. He read 4 names. Colin Vance was one of them. Then he paused. He leaned slightly toward the microphone, the way people do when they are delivering information that was not part of the original program, and said, "Before we announce this year's honoree, I want to acknowledge that the TXSA board is aware of a significant piece of investigative journalism published this morning that speaks directly to the professional record of one of our nominees. Out of respect for the integrity of this award and the journalism community it represents, the board has decided that this category will be deferred pending a full review." The room went quiet. Not a shocked quiet, a professional one. The silence of a room full of journalists who have just understood what happened and are already writing the story in their heads. I picked up my glass of ginger ale. I raised it slightly, toward no one in particular, toward the podium maybe, or toward the backyard on Clearfield Drive, where I had stood in 50-degree weather with my phone held up to a kitchen window. Nobody at my table saw it. I didn't need them to. Colin Vance left the dinner at 9:44 p.m. He did not look at me on his way out. Diana left at 9:51. I stayed until the end of the program. Here is what happened afterward. I'll tell it plainly. Colin Vance was placed on administrative leave by Lone Star Sports Weekly's parent company, Ridgecrest Media Group. On the Monday following the dinner, he resigned 11 days later. A statement from Ridgecrest acknowledged editorial practices inconsistent with the publication's standards and announced a review of its submissions and intellectual property policies. Devon Walsh publicly attributed his Houston ownership piece to my original pitch. He wrote a statement on his newsletter that received 18,000 reads in the first 24 hours. He also returned the prize money from the Texas Press Association Award and formally petitioned the association to review the attribution. The TPA review is ongoing. Devon and I have had coffee 3 times since then. He is a good writer and a good man, and nothing that happened was his fault. Priya Nair is back in Houston. She has a regular column at the American Sports Review now. Last month she had a front-of-book piece that I read twice. I texted her when I saw it. She texted back, took long enough. Gary Howland is still in communications. He says he's content. I believe him. Rachel Stone's piece was named one of the 10 best works of sports journalism in the country by the Associated Press Sports Editors for 2024. My name is on it. I'm not going to pretend that doesn't matter. It does. Diana and I separated in May. The divorce was filed in August. I won't detail the proceedings because they are personal and still ongoing, and also because this story is not about the divorce. The divorce is just the part that wraps up a marriage that was already over, that had probably been over for longer than I had let myself see. What I will say is this: I did not yell. I did not cry in front of her. I did not make dramatic speeches or do anything I am ashamed of. I hired a good attorney, a woman named Sandra Pierce out of Houston, and I conducted myself with the dignity of a man who knows exactly what he did and did not do wrong. That's not nothing. That is actually quite a lot. I was offered Colin's position. The interim editorial director of Ridgecrest Media Group called me on a Tuesday in June. He was smooth and practiced and very good at the kind of conversation that tries to turn a corporation's culpability into an opportunity for the person who was harmed. He offered me the editor-in-chief role at Lone Star Sports Weekly, more money than I had made in any previous year. Corner office on the 14th floor of the building downtown. I thought about it for almost 24 hours. Not because I was tempted by the corner office. I have never been a corner office person. I thought about it because I wanted to make sure I was saying no for the right reasons and not just the satisfying ones. I called him back the next morning. I appreciate the offer, I said. Genuinely, but I'm a writer. That's what I do. I'm going to keep doing it. He said he understood. He said he hoped I'd consider continuing to contribute to the magazine. Send me a pitch, I told him.
I'll think about it.
6 months after the awards dinner, I was sitting at the writing desk in my new apartment on Heights Boulevard in Houston. 1 bedroom, good light. The desk faces the window, which looks out over the street and the live oak trees that line the block. In the evenings, the light comes through the branches in a particular way that I have come to depend on. My phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. A journalism student at the University of Houston, 21 years old, working on a paper about editorial ethics, who had read the American Sports Review piece and wanted to know if I'd be willing to talk about how I'd gathered the information, about what had driven me to pursue the story when I could have walked away. We talked for an hour. At the end, she asked, "Were you scared when you were standing in your backyard, listening through the window?"
I thought about that. No, I said, I wasn't scared then. When were you scared?
Before. When I thought my career was dying and I didn't know why. When I was looking at a byline I'd spent 20 years building and watching it shrink, month by month, and blaming myself for something that wasn't my fault. That was the scared part.
Not knowing.
What changed? The not knowing ended, I said. Once you know what you're dealing with, you're just a journalist with a story, and that's not scary. She asked, "What is it?" I looked out the window at the live oaks on Heights Boulevard, at the late afternoon light coming through in long, clean angles.
Home, I said. That's home.
My byline is still in print every week. On stories that matter, the kind that make people set the piece down and stare at the wall for a minute because something in them got rearranged. The kind where the name Jack Mercer at the top of a page tells the reader exactly what they're about to get. Something true, something earned, something that nobody tried to manage.
That's all I ever wanted. That's all I ever was.
Let me ask you something directly before you go. If you had been standing in that backyard, if you had heard what Jack heard through that kitchen window, what would you have done? Would you have walked back inside and confronted them right there? Would you have walked away and tried to unsee it?
Or would you have done what Jack did, stayed quiet, pulled out your phone, and started building the case?
Tell me in the comments, because I think the answer says something real about who we are under pressure. And if this story meant something to you, hit subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear that being underestimated is not the same as being finished. Like the video so more people find it. And stay close, there are more stories coming that I think you're going to want to be here for. The people who tried to manage Jack Mercer made one mistake. They forgot what he did for a living